The fluorescent lights of Morrison and Associates hummed overhead as I sat across from the three senior partners, their faces etched with the kind of concern usually reserved for malpractice suits. "Drop a red heart if this hits you." Margaret Chin leaned forward, her fingers steepled as she spoke in measured tones about Julian Blackwood, the new associate who'd started just 2 weeks ago. "He's undeniably brilliant," she said, exchanging glances with the other partners. "His work on the Henderson case was exceptional, but Jake, there are complications we need you to be aware of." The word complications hung in the air like smoke, vague and unsettling. Thomas Wright cleared his throat, adding something about Julian's history and how it might create challenges for team dynamics. I nodded along, but my mind kept drifting to 3 days ago when I literally collided with Julian in the hallway outside the copy room. Papers had scattered everywhere, and when our eyes met as we both reached for the same document, something electric had passed between us. His dark eyes had held mine for just a moment too long, and I'd felt my pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with embarrassment. "We're not saying don't work with him," Margaret continued, "but perhaps maintain some professional distance. We want to avoid any potential issues." Her words felt like a warning wrapped in corporate speak, but they couldn't explain the magnetic pull I'd been feeling toward Julian ever since that brief encounter. As I left the meeting, their vague concerns about Julian's complications only made me more curious. There was something about him that I couldn't shake, something that made my carefully ordered world feel suddenly unstable and alive. The next morning, I threw myself into research about Julian, telling myself it was purely professional curiosity. What I discovered only deepened the mystery surrounding the partners' warnings. Julian wasn't just talented, he was exceptional. Harvard Law Review, clerked for a federal judge, published articles on constitutional law that had been cited by the Supreme Court. His legal mind was sharper than anyone I'd encountered, including most of the partners. So why the hushed concerns about his complications? The answer came during my second week of quietly observing him. I was grabbing coffee in the break room when I overheard Sandra from HR on the phone, her voice deliberately low. "Well, he's very qualified, but you know how it is. He's openly gay." Some of the older partners are concerned about client reactions. My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. Openly gay. In our conservative corporate environment, that explained everything: the carefully worded warnings, the uncomfortable glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when Julian entered a room. The complications weren't about his work performance, they were about who he was. That evening, I found myself staying late again, hoping to catch another glimpse of Julian. He was in the library, surrounded by case files, his sleeves rolled up and tie loosened. When he looked up and caught me staring, I felt that same electric jolt from our hallway encounter. "Need help with something?" he asked, amusement flickering in his dark eyes. "Actually, yes. The Morrison case. I heard you've been working on it. Pull up a chair." His smile was warm, genuine. "Fair warning, I have strong opinions about their defense strategy." For the next 2 hours, we dissected the case together. Julian's insights were brilliant, but it was more than his intelligence that captivated me. He had a dry sense of humor that caught me off guard, making me laugh at unexpected moments. When he disagreed with my analysis, he did so with respectful confidence that made me want to defend my position just to keep the conversation going. "You know," Julian said as we packed up, "most people here act like I'm going to spontaneously combust if they get too close." "Their loss," I replied, then immediately worried I'd said too much. Julian studied my face for a moment. "Thanks, Jake. That means something." Walking to the elevator together, I found myself acutely aware of his presence beside me. The way he moved, the subtle cologne he wore, the quiet confidence in his posture, everything about him fascinated me in a way that felt both thrilling and terrifying. As the elevator doors closed between us, I realized the partners' warnings had been completely backward. Julian wasn't the dangerous one here. The real danger was how effortlessly he was making me question everything I thought I knew about myself. I spent the weekend replaying every moment from that Friday evening, analyzing Julian's laugh, the way he looked at me when discussing strategy, how natural our conversation had felt. By Monday morning, I was practically vibrating with anticipation to see him again, which should have been my first clue that this went far deeper than professional admiration. "You're in early," Julian observed, appearing in the doorway of my office with 2 cups of coffee. He'd apparently noticed my habit of arriving before dawn, because one of those cups was clearly meant for me. "Thanks," I said, accepting the coffee and trying not to notice how our fingers brushed in the exchange. "I wanted to review the Morrison contract before the meeting. Mind if I join you?" I had some thoughts about the liability clauses. What followed was the most productive morning I'd had in months. Julian had this way of building on my ideas, pushing them further without making me feel inadequate. When I suggested a particular approach to the indemnification language, he'd nod thoughtfully and say, "That's brilliant. And what if we also?" Soon we were bouncing ideas back and forth like we'd been working together for years. "You know," Julian said during a brief lull, "I wasn't sure what to expect when they assigned us together. The partners made it sound like you might be resistant to collaboration." I nearly choked on my coffee. They said that about me. Not in so many words. But there was definitely some concern about whether we'd be a good fit. He paused, studying my face. "I'm guessing they had similar conversations with you about me." "Something like that," I admitted, remembering their warnings about his complications. Julian's expression grew more serious. "Can I ask what they told you? Because I have a feeling their concerns about me weren't exactly about my legal skills." I hesitated, not wanting to repeat the partner's vague warnings. "They mentioned you might be challenging to work with, but there had been some issues at your previous firm." "Ah." Julian leaned back in his chair, his smile turning sardonic. "Let me guess. They didn't specify what kind of issues, but they made it sound ominous enough to put you on guard." "Pretty much. The issues," Julian said carefully, "were that I refused to pretend to be someone I'm not. I went to firm events alone instead of bringing a fake girlfriend. I didn't laugh at homophobic jokes. I corrected people when they assumed I was straight. Apparently, that made some clients uncomfortable. The matter-of-fact way he said it made my chest tighten." "That's why you left?" "They made it clear I had two choices, go back in the closet or find another job. So I found another job." He shrugged, but I could see the hurt he was trying to hide. "I'm hoping this firm will be different, but I'm not holding my breath." "For what it's worth," I said, "I think they're idiots for almost losing you over something so irrelevant to your abilities." "Irrelevant." Julian repeated the word thoughtfully. "I like that. Most people either pretend it doesn't exist or act like it's the most important thing about me." "It's just one part of who you are," I said, then immediately worried I'd oversimplified something important. But Julian smiled, and it was different from his usual sardonic grin, warmer, more genuine. "Exactly. Though I have to say, it's refreshing to work with someone who gets that." The rest of the week fell into a pattern. We'd arrive early, work through lunch, stay late, and somehow never run out of things to discuss. Julian had opinions about everything: books, movies, the terrible coffee in the break room, and I found myself storing up observations throughout the day just to share them with him. "You're different than I expected," he said one evening as we waited for the elevator. "Different how?" "Funnier. More thoughtful. Less." He paused, searching for the word. "Less corporate robot, I guess." I was prepared for someone much more buttoned up. If only he knew how much I was struggling to stay buttoned up around him. Because somewhere between our morning coffee discussions and late-night strategy sessions, I'd started looking forward to seeing him more than anything else in my day. More than going home to Alexis. More than the weekend. More than anything. The elevator arrived, and as we stepped inside, Julian's shoulder brushed against mine. Such a small thing, but it sent electricity through my entire body. I found myself wondering what it would feel like to reach out and take his hand, to close the distance between us, to finally acknowledge the connection I felt growing stronger every day. "Same time tomorrow?" Julian asked as we reached the lobby. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, and meant it more than I'd ever meant anything. Walking to my car, I realized that Julian had become the best part of my day, and I was in serious trouble. Because this wasn't just friendship or professional respect anymore. This was something much more dangerous, something that made me question everything I thought I knew about myself, including the life I'd so carefully constructed with Alexis. The Morrison case deadline loomed like a storm cloud over the entire firm. By Thursday evening, most of the office had emptied out, leaving behind only the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of the cleaning crew. I was packing up my briefcase when I noticed Julian's office light still burning bright down the hall. He was hunched over his desk, surrounded by towers of depositions and legal briefs, his usually perfect hair disheveled from running his hands through it. Even from the doorway, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept rubbing his temples between reviewing documents. "Still here?" I asked, knocking gently on his door frame. Julian looked up, his eyes tired, but still holding that spark I'd grown to love. "Yeah, just trying to make sense of these witness statements. They're all over the place, and Morrison wants everything reconciled by tomorrow morning." I checked my watch. It was already past 9. "Have you eaten anything?" "I grabbed a granola bar around 6, he said absently, already turning back to his papers. Something in his voice, a weariness that went beyond just professional exhaustion, made me step into his office. "Julian, you can't run on granola bars and coffee. Let me help." He looked up again, this time really seeing me. "Jake, you don't have to eat." "I know I don't have to," I interrupted, setting my briefcase down and pulling up a chair. "But I want to. What do you need me to do?" For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across his face before he composed himself. "The Henderson deposition conflicts with what Martinez testified about the timeline. If we can't resolve it, Morrison's going to lose his mind." I rolled up my sleeves and dove in. We worked side by side, ordering Chinese takeout that arrived cold because we were too engrossed in cross-referencing testimonies to eat it hot. As the hours passed, the office grew quieter, more intimate. The cleaning crew came and went, leaving us alone in our pool of desk lamplight. Around midnight, Julian leaned back in his chair and stretched, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You know, I used to do this alone at my last firm. All-nighters, I mean. Just me and whatever impossible deadline they'd thrown at me." "That sounds lonely," I said, not looking up from the timeline I was sketching out. It was. His voice was quiet, thoughtful. Being the only openly gay lawyer there, it was like being in a fishbowl. Everyone watching, waiting for me to mess up or prove their assumptions right. I learned to keep my head down, do the work, and not get too close to anyone. I set down my pen and looked at him. Really looked at him. In the soft light, with his guard down, he looked younger somehow, more fragile than the confident lawyer I'd come to know. "That's not how it is here," I said, the words coming out more intense than I'd intended. Julian met my eyes, and something passed between us, electric and dangerous. "No," he said softly. "It's not. You've made it different." The air in the room shifted, became charged with something I couldn't name but could feel in every nerve ending. We were sitting closer than necessary, our knees almost touching under the desk. I could smell his cologne, faint now after the long day, mixed with something that was purely him. "Julian," I started, not sure what I was going to say, but knowing I had to say something. The way he was looking at me, like I was the only person in the world who really saw him. "I've never had a friend like you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Someone who just gets it. Gets me. Friend." The word should have been safe, should have been exactly what I needed to hear. Instead, it felt like a door closing and opening at the same time. I wanted to tell him that friendship didn't cover what I was feeling, that the way my heart raced when he smiled at me went far beyond professional admiration or even friendship. I started, leaning slightly forward. His eyes dropped to my lips for just a second, so brief I might have imagined it. But I didn't imagine the way his breath caught, or how my own pulse was hammering so loud I was sure he could hear it. The moment stretched between us, fragile and full of possibility. I could feel myself leaning closer, drawn by something stronger than gravity. Julian's eyes were wide, searching my face for something I wasn't sure I was brave enough to give him. Then reality crashed back in. What was I doing? I had a girlfriend. I was straight. I was Jake Morrison, the partner's son, the guy who dated the right women and followed the expected path. I couldn't be sitting here wanting to kiss my male colleague, no matter how much every cell in my body was screaming for it. I jerked back so suddenly that my chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I should go," I said, my voice rough and strange. "Alexis is probably wondering where I am." The hurt that flashed across Julian's face was like a physical blow. "Of course," he said, immediately putting his professional mask back on. "Thanks for the help." I grabbed my jacket and practically ran for the door, leaving Julian alone with his papers and the ghost of whatever had almost happened between us. The next 3 days passed in a haze of careful avoidance and manufactured excuses. I found myself taking alternate routes through the office, timing my coffee breaks to avoid Julian's schedule, and burying myself in paperwork that suddenly seemed urgent. Every time I caught a glimpse of him across the bullpen, My chest tightened with a mixture of longing and shame that made it hard to breathe. Julian, for his part, maintained perfect professional courtesy. When our paths inevitably crossed in meetings or case briefings, he was polite but distant, his warm familiarity replaced by the kind of measured politeness reserved for strangers. The easy banter we developed over weeks of late-night collaboration had evaporated, leaving behind an awkward formality that felt like a physical ache. But it was the moments when he thought I wasn't looking that cut deepest. I'd catch glimpses of confusion flickering across his features, or see him start to approach my desk only to turn away at the last moment. Once, I watched him pause outside the conference room where I was working alone, his hand raised as if to knock, before he shook his head and walked away. The hurt in his posture was unmistakable, and knowing I'd caused it made me feel sick. By Thursday evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes after work, staring at my phone, Alexis's contact information glowing on the screen. She'd been texting me about dinner plans for the weekend, about meeting her parents next month, about a future that felt increasingly like a costume I was wearing rather than a life I was living. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I was living a lie. Not just to Julian, not just to Alexis, but to myself. Every smile I forced at company parties when colleagues talked about their wives, every time I nodded along with conversations about attractive women, every moment I pretended to be someone I wasn't. It was all built on a foundation of fear and denial that was slowly suffocating me. I thought about Julian's quiet courage, the way he navigated our conservative firm with dignity and authenticity. He told me about the loneliness, yes, but there had been something else in his voice that night, a fundamental peace with himself that I'd never experienced. He knew who he was, and he lived that truth even when it was difficult, even when it meant eating lunch alone, even when it meant enduring whispered conversations and sideways glances from partners who saw him as a complication rather than a person. That night, I called Alexis. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright with the kind of uncomplicated happiness that made what I had to do even harder. "Jake, I was just thinking about you. I found this amazing restaurant for Saturday night." "Alexis, we need to talk." The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of words I'd never thought I'd have to say. When I finally found the courage to speak, the words came out in a rush, clumsy and inadequate but honest in a way I'd never been before. I told her about questioning myself, about realizing I'd been trying to fit into a life that wasn't mine, about how unfair it was to both of us to continue pretending. I didn't mention Julian specifically. That felt like another conversation, one I might never have the courage for, but I was honest about everything else. About the growing certainty that I was gay, about the years of pushing down feelings I couldn't name, about how sorry I was for not understanding myself sooner. She cried. I cried. We talked for 2 hours, navigating the painful territory of a relationship ending not because of anything either of us had done wrong, but because I'd finally stopped running from who I really was. She was hurt, confused, angry, and then surprisingly compassionate. In the end, she said something that stayed with me. "I just want you to be happy, Jake. Really happy. And if you haven't been that with me, then we both deserve better." After we hung up, I sat in my empty apartment feeling simultaneously devastated and liberated. The life I'd been building was gone, but for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe fully. I thought about Julian, about the way he looked at me that night in the conference room, about the conversation we'd shared and the moment when everything had shifted between us. I still didn't know if I'd have the courage to face him, to explain what had happened and why I'd run. But I knew I couldn't keep living as half a person, hiding from the truth that Julian had helped me see. The morning after his conversation with Alexis, Jake stood outside Julian's office, his heart hammering against his ribs. Through the glass partition, he could see Julian bent over case files, his dark hair catching the early sunlight. Jake had rehearsed this moment a dozen times, but now that he was here, every carefully planned word seemed to evaporate. He knocked softly, and Julian looked up, his expression immediately guarded. "Jake." The name came out flat, professional. "What can I do for you?" Jake stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I need to apologize. And I need to explain what happened the other night." Julian leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "You don't owe me an explanation. We're colleagues, nothing more." The words stung, but Jake pressed forward. "That's not true, and you know it. What happened between us? It wasn't nothing. At least not for me. Something flickered across Julian's face before the mask slipped back into place. Then why did you run? Jake's throat felt tight. Because I was terrified. Because I've spent my entire adult life trying to be someone I'm not, and you made me feel things I thought I'd buried forever. Julian's expression softened slightly, but he remained silent. I ended things with Alexis, Jake continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Last night, I told her the truth about who I am, about what I've been hiding from everyone, including myself. Julian's eyes widened. Jake. I'm gay, Jake said, the words feeling both foreign and natural on his tongue. I've known it for years, but I was too scared to admit it. Too scared of what it would mean, what I'd lose. But watching you, seeing how you live authentically even when it's hard, you showed me what courage looks like. Julian's professional facade cracked completely. You can't just say that and expect everything to be okay. You hurt me, Jake. When you ran that night, it felt like rejection all over again. I know, Jake said, stepping closer. I hate that I hurt you. I hate that I was such a coward. But I'm here now, and I'm trying to be honest. About everything. Julian studied his face for a long moment. What are you saying exactly? Jake's hands trembled as he met Julian's gaze. I'm saying that I have feelings for you. Real feelings. And I'm saying that for the first time in my life, I want to stop hiding who I am. Julian's breath caught. Jake, this changes everything. I know it does, Jake replied. I'm not expecting anything from you. I just needed you to know the truth. All of it. Julian stood slowly, moving around his desk until he was close enough that Jake could smell his cologne. The truth is, I have feelings for you too. But I need to know you're sure about this. About yourself. Jake nodded, his heart racing. I've never been more sure of anything. Julian's eyes searched my face, vulnerability flickering beneath his careful composure. I need to know you're sure, Jake. Not just about me, but about yourself. About what this means. I reached for his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin against mine. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. These past few weeks of figuring myself out, of finally being honest about who I am, it all led me back to you. He squeezed my fingers gently. Then yes, I'd like to try this with you. 6 months later, I barely recognized the man I used to be. Julian and I had built something beautiful together, navigating the complexities of our professional environment while growing closer every day. The law firm's initial warnings about Julian seemed absurd now. His only crime had been living authentically in a world that wasn't ready for it. Coming out hadn't been as terrifying as I'd imagined. Most of our colleagues accepted the news with surprising grace, and those who didn't matter less than I'd thought. The senior partner's concerns about Julian's complications had nothing to do with his character or competence. They were simply uncomfortable with difference. Now, watching Julian laugh at something on his computer screen from across our shared office, I realized the real danger had never been falling for him. It had been the possibility of missing out on this love, this authenticity, this version of myself I'd been too afraid to embrace.